Okay, let's start this again. Good evening, everybody. Next Monday, we have a workshop, and we normally do macro and some other things. And I want to challenge everybody to bring in, if you're going to come and shoot, bring in some sort of object that we can all shoot. um, whether we can do macro with it, or whether we can do still life with it, or whether we can do some weird abstract with it. But I invite everybody to bring in at least one object. If you want to bring in more, you're welcome to do that. And give everybody an opportunity to see what you're thinking would make a good subject.
House, this way you photograph them, then you get to eat them.
That's coming from our judge for tonight. I have an interesting glass block that I inherited, and we put lighting behind it, and it makes some really weird abstract patterns, which is fun.
I could probably hook up an external monitor to the laptop, right? Yeah, because I got
Yeah.
I could bring my larger monitor. You set the block up in front of it, then we put whatever HD images.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's get creative and do some stuff that's different. And I will go to Trader Joe's and get the traditional flowers, but then maybe we want to put the flowers behind the glass block and see what we come up with. So it should be fun to try some new stuff. And then there were some questions about our last competition, which will be 2 weeks after that in May. And for that competition, we have two categories: things that fly, which includes anything that has the capability of flying.
Have to be alive.
It can be a machine. It can be a plane. It can be if it could be a kite. If you want to take pictures of your drone while you're flying your drone, you can do that.
Macy's Flower Show.
And then the other category is zoology. And the reason we're doing this is because when we voted last year, those two tied, and we didn't want to disappoint anybody who was hoping for one or the other. Our competition tonight is macro and close-up, with the last of our open category for this year. And our judge is Phil Echo, who everybody knows. He was here a couple of weeks ago and did the great program on his travels in Italy. And so we'll start our competition.
Is that microphone close enough to me that they can hear?
Yeah, we've been doing pretty good with it. It's meant for like conference room type deal. Everybody give me a shout out who could hear me, because I see no faces.
You're good, loud and clear.
Hello?
Can everyone hear?
Yep, coming through
Yeah.
loud and clear.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
You
good.
need to share the screen.
All right, we're recording.
And I'll give you the lights.
Thank you. Hate when that does that when I do it. Thank you. All right, where's my brain today? Sign B, macro and close-up. Petals.
One of the things I like about the image is that the maker has taken your main pattern all the way to your edges so that your mind doesn't really fall off of the point you're trying to make. I like to ask a lot of questions. One is, what is the focal point and where is it placed in the frame? If it's the center portion of the flower, we're kind of touching the bottom in the middle. It's in the middle. It's touching the bottom, that one little petal that's coming up. So I don't know that that's the most pleasing position in the frame. I think you're better off with it either centered or at the junction of the thirds or halfway into it and getting even tighter. Another thing I struggle with a little bit is lighting. Your light source seems to be brighter in the top center portion where also changes the color. So the one place where your eye gravitates to a color that's dominant other than your main color is kind of not really important in the overall scene as a focal point, and it's at the edge. I'd also consider getting rid of that little black, no points coming off for it, but that little black sliver just shy of the top of the frame, just to the right. See that one black area? It's the only part that is kind of stands out. It's not part of your pattern. That would be an easy thing to take care of. One of the things, though, is that we've got a lot of areas in the pinks that are devoid of detail. It's almost like they're overexposed, and probably not because of brightness, but more so because of saturation. So toning that back, I think, would be helpful. 6.
The flower.
The center nature, I think, works well with this particular angle of view on this particular flower. On one hand, I'm intrigued a little bit by the thin light green or middle green edges on some of the petals in the center, but I am drawn into this big green eyeball that's staring at me that I think is really nowhere significant compared to the rest of the flower. And that's what I just keep focusing on, that really saturated green center. I wonder if that's what you really, want my eye to focus on. If you're going to use a total black background, I would make sure it's clean, unless you're going to show me a little something. Because if you look in the middle of the frame, right at the bottom under the lower petal, you got little specks of green that almost look like, nuclear dust spots. So if you're not going to get a faint anatomy of what's going on there, I would probably eliminate it. 7.
The seed.
Compositionally, I think this is very pleasing. I like the entry point of the stem. I'm glad it's not touching an edge. Very often things look great touching a corner, but I think more often than not, they look better when they're not touching a corner, and this one is not. And I really like the spacing where the stem splits a little bit. I think that's pretty cool in anatomy. I do like the light fall off around the edges of parts of your main subject as you get around the perimeter. But I would say that we are definitely a little overexposed and blown out in some of the brighter yellow areas just offset from the center. So the main thing, and even on the right side, you have to look at your histogram. Put the blinkies on. Make sure you can see your histogram on the back of your viewfinder of your camera. I even have it set where I can see it through my viewfinder. And you don't want to blow out your highlights. And if they're not blown out, then it's oversaturated. You can tone it back a little bit. 7. Seven. 8. Chicken cutlets.
Yeah.
I mentioned chicken cutlets. That's what happens.
Sign B, macro and close-up. Honorable mention. The seed, Leon Labransky. Okay. This one's got. So at bottom toward the little bit on the bottom in the middlemost bit is a spot on the screen.
No, that was different. That was on that slide. Those little
Oh, yeah,
specs.
no, yeah, but I'm saying that I thought you might have saw it on the seed. I could see a little bit of assigned A macro and close-up tulip.
All right, pleasing composition. Um, I just mentioned about the entry point into the frame of a stem. I think the stem is fine in the corner. I think part of what makes me feel that way is the angulation of the tulip itself. If you look at the top of it, it's on a diagonal. It's on a nice diagonal on it. So I do think it works. What I find interesting is the lighting is not front lit. It's really more backlit and has the light illuminates through different thicknesses in the curls of the petals. I think it separates the petals from each other in a pleasing way, especially the second petal from right on the top, that little triangle that's created is kind of interesting. I'm not sure your choice in background is the strongest choice. It is very bright. It's not blown out, but it is overpowering. And although it delineates the anatomy of the flower very well, I just keep looking at it. So for something like this, I would probably consider a different coloration or tonal range in background. Strong enough to see again. 7.
Picnic crashers.
I appreciate you're trying to frame your main subject with the use of the out of focus greenery, as well as the rim of the back end of the rind of the watermelon. But what I would say is a couple of things. One, I don't know that. I mean, I don't feel that just the head of the monarch is enough to occupy, that little bit of the frame and have everything else out of focus. It's just a really small portion. I think the rind of the watermelon is overpowering in its brightness, as well as some of whatever is that purplish washed out in far background. And I also think the saturation of the greenery in the foreground is also overpowering. So I would definitely play with saturation, but I do think maybe changing your angle and getting a little more depth of field on the monarch would be helpful. 6.
Zinnia.
Beautiful exposure on the flower. If black background really makes it stand out very well, I will say that, I do get a sense of it just kind of hovering because I can see some of the subtle greenery around the periphery where I kind of wonder if a very darkened stem would be helpful or not, instead of, having part of this, it looks like it's almost like it's suspended. But we do suffer a little bit from exposure and saturation. And what do I mean by that? Look at the little stamen. They're blown out. So you got to make sure you're not blowing out. You're in a sea of pink, and then you've got some yellows. So the yellows really take on a strong identity because they're the one thing that's different from the mass of color that you see, and they are overexposed. 6.
Peony.
I find these to be a very difficult flower to make look attractive. Their anatomy is really a lot going on, and I think this is a very good choice, and I think you've done your composition well. You've got just enough interest. I like the way the tips of the petals present. Now this particular image definitely also is overexposed, and we've got some bright areas that are on the bright side. I kind of get a different feeling for this. I feel like this was processed on purpose to be a little bit more in the pastel, almost starting to move into the abstract realm. So the only thing you can ever ask from a judge is to be consistent in their comments. So I'm going to tell you why this image suffers from some of the things I complained about in other images, but why I feel it works for this particular image. Because the whole overall processing, lack of a black point, contrast, I think it's at a processing a little slight to the abstract realm. 7.
Sunlight bulb.
I guess this would be more of your considered close-up. I mean, yeah, because your image size here is probably 12
Yeah.
inches. Yeah, okay. All right. Listen, I like it. There's quite a few things I like about it. I think the bulb stands out very well in its processing. I like how the selective focus starts to fall off once you get away from the bulb. Enough to tell me what's going on, but really keeping my attention on the bulb. I think the background works very well. It's almost like looking at, we talked about shit cutlets. Now we're going to talk about stuffed artichokes because you brought an Italian guy in here to talk to tonight. So everything relates to food. I'm looking at the artichoke in the background, and it's almost like concentric rings of light emanating out also. I think it works very well. I do like the separation of the artichoke from the wire supporting the light fixture at the top. The more I look at it, the more I like it. 7.
Rope.
We're all going to the diner after this. Too bad you all stayed home. It's only us going. So here we have a pattern of very similar shapes, color, tonal range, and it sort of moves into the realm of monotonous, right? But I think the maker did an excellent job of taking us away from something that's monotonous because of your composition. If you look at the overall composition, you've got the big V triangle that comes in from the top and moves you from high left to lower right. You've got the little darker triangles in the lower left that kind of curve you in. And you've got that little curl of whatever these little, this is like pasta vazul when you get rid of the gravy. See, you got the beams on the lower left side. It's kind of pushing you into the center. And then you've got, these two oblongs things that are at the junction of the thirds, a beautiful place. I love the way the light moves throughout this image. I think you've taken something that's really not necessarily very attractive and made it look really attractive. 7. Good job.
Flower.
So the flower is very nice. Again, I like the backlighting coming through the petals. One of the things I like is I like the dark pink petal in the middle. I would ask, what do you think about the vertical rotation of your flower? We're straight up and down the middle with the two main petals, right? And we're almost horizontal with the one on the right. And the dark one that stands out as a true identity is also on the middle horizon line. So most of the stuff is in a cross, going vertically and horizontally to the frame. What if you were to took us on a little more of a diagonal and that lower bottom petal was pointing into that lower right corner, and now that other petal would be in the darker center, small petal would be pointing to the lower left corner, and then the big broadest petal would occupy the most space at the top right. I think that would change your perspective a little bit. I do like the fact that you use this vignette on the background because now it solves some of the things that I was discussing earlier. 7.
Petals.
The interplay between the two main colors here is very, very pleasing. I like that you committed more to one color-based a subject than the other. You've also elected to use some selective focus to keep attention on the petals. I would say the anatomy of the petal that's in focus is really strong enough to hold your whole composition together. I guess that's subjective. But look, you have clean color that occupies the upper left, the upper right, the lower left, and then you've got this void of black at the lower right, and then a little hint of color coming back in the corner. I think it changes the balance, and because it's so stark compared to everything else, that black, it takes on a strong identity that I can't stop looking at it. So, keeping this image, your subject to all four corners, I think would have been helpful. 6.
Lotus bud.
The choice of darkening most of your background to show its anatomy, but make it not so competitive with the flower, I think was a good choice. I think it works well. I'd actually like to see it even more out of focus if possible, because it does take on somewhat of an identity, but still, I think you're moving in the right direction. I would argue again, do I like this so vertical? Or would I use a square, or would I put it on a diagonal, or do something different than kind of making it straight up and down the middle? Food for thought. How do you like that bright? Only thing in the background that's kind of bright is that white spot just offset the top left section of the quadrant of this image. Does that help? Do you like it? There's one on the right side too, a little less. I would absolutely clone those out. They're not helping. They're drawing attention. 7. 7. 9. 9. 9. 8. 7.
Signed A, macro and close-up. Honorable mention, flower, Margot Partridge. Equal merit, peony, Margot Partridge. Sunlight bowl, Fernando Gomes. Rope, Wendy Kaplitz. All right. Sign salon, macro and close-up. Computer board on fire.
I think the maker did a very nice job with putting this image together. Your different layers of fire based on color blend well together. We don't have considerable blown out areas, which is very easy to do. I even think how it layers over the chip is done kind of interesting. I kind of wonder why the chip is on the same plane and it's in focus everywhere except for the top left portion of the top level of the chip. Why is that out of focus and almost the rest of the chip is in focus? Then the writing on the orange area, the lower almost right side, is also out of focus. Maybe that's just the way it is. I'm not so sure. Still, very nice blending job. 7.
Long-legged fly.
Very nice angle of view. I think it presents well. There's quite a few things I like in the composition. You're committing more to one eye than the other, which is fine. Instead of getting a little bit more of a 3/4 shot, which would also be pretty cool. One of the things I like about it this way is if you look at I don't know what this part of the anatomy where the antenna comes from, the little figs in the middle of the head, they rise above the eye, so you can see them stand out nicely against the background. There's something like a hair coming right out of the middle of it that I kind of wonder why that's not in focus when it looks like it's behind the first fig, which is in focus. I'm being cute with the fig, but and it's in front of the one behind it that's in focus. So why is that hair kind of like smudge looking? I'm not so sure. I love the way the hairs on the back of the fly show up. I think you've done a really good job with everything. It's in tight. 7.
Monarch on a leaf.
So, the colorful parts of the monarch are exposed very well. Your dark areas are devoid of any detail whatsoever. And they do occupy a lot of the frame. I can't tell where the eyes separate from the head, where the head separates from the thorax, where the thorax separates from the wings. And this is a very difficult subject to photograph because of the tonal range from brightness to darkness. So you do have you are getting shadowing, so we have light coming in straight on. I wonder if we couldn't open the shadows a little bit more, or pop a little more flash from a different angle on this, or pop a flash on this. There's something weird in the background that I want to talk about. Look in the bottom of the frame. You've got this vein just offset from the right. It's like a double vein with the little dots on it. It comes in focus, and then it gets blurred out by something, and then it's in focus further up. There's a smudge just to the left of it. And if you look at the wing on the left side, for those of you who are here, I would like, just, it's not going to work on there. It's not working purity, but on the left side of the wing, there's a semicircular, some kind of, like a clone was done without a smooth brush right at the edge there, which kind of looks a little odd also. 7.
Blue poppy.
Well, the offset nature of the center portion of the flower makes it more interesting, I think. I do think that the overall balance of the image is a little bit of struggle. You got this dark triangle at the top right and on the bottom right again. That leaves you kind of like an imbalance in your image. I kind of wonder, once again, what if you rotated this counterclockwise? That the petal on the lower right that juts out, have it pointing to the top left corner. Then you'd have the top left petal more to the left corner, this bottom one more to the right. You'd have something occupying more of your frame. I'd also consider toning down the brightness of the center portion a little bit. But still, I think overall it's good enough to get you into the second round. 7.
New life coming this spring.
Compositionally, I think it's done really well. I love the flow through the image of the twig, the two the two blooms. I like the different stage that they're at. I like the leaf that's coming in. I will say that your processing has a couple of things that I kind of struggle with. One is, look at the leaf. Look at the top right section of the leaf. There's a halo on the right side of it. What is that halo? It ends abruptly halfway down the right side. And then if you look at where the green stem, the green bud stem meets the leaf, there's something bright right behind it. And then if you look at the left side of the stem of the other petal, it's a little white on that left edge. Look at the top, is a little white right where the leaf meets the stick on the top. It's a little white on the top edge. So I wonder if with the change that we did in our background is not brought in tight enough. And I do think we're a little heavy in contrast and perhaps sharpness in this processing. 6.
Nazca Booby.
Well, I commend the maker on keeping in focus as much as you did at this magnification. Very nice job. Very nice overall exposure. I would say in the post-processing, a little help would benefit from just selecting the feathers on the back side of the head and toning them down a little bit. I don't think they're blown out, but they are definitely a little bright. So I would tone those down a little bit. And then the only other thing is, look at the circular area in the background right underneath where the mandible meets the head. It's got this bright circle. I think just selecting that, I like to use Vivasa, but whatever you like to do and just tone down its brightness a little bit, I think would help because it does draw attention away a little bit, but still, this is a very nice image. So,
Dahlia Center.
I think you have a very pleasing subject. One of the difficulties that you're having, and I'm sure went through your mind, is you like the anatomy of those pink little swirls on the right side of your frame, so you didn't want to crop those out. And in doing so, now we've got these black voids all on the right side, a teeny bit on the lower left, and almost non-existent on the upper left, which changed the overall balance of the image. So perhaps you either need to get tighter and sacrifice those, or get looser and make the image have a little bit more balance. The other thing is, look at the center portion of the flower. Are those whites blown out? I would say yes. 7.
Anthurium elegans.
Very pleasing composition. I love the flow throughout the whole image. First of all, the major flow, the little diagonal nature of the stem, the position of the flower. I like the way the flower does not have direct mergers with its background. I think the background is a pleasing background. It's out of focus, shows a little bit of what's going on. If that's your intent, you could do this many different ways. I think you've done a good job with it. So I'm just going to give you my personal take. It's not going to really hurt you in the scoring, so don't get nervous. But look at the 2 green blebs in the big void on the right side, high up, kind of at like around 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the background. They're kind of just freestanding. I would clone them out. I don't think they're helpful. The other thing I might consider doing is just toning down some of the vibrancy in the greens and the leaves in the background, which would keep even more attention on your main subject. Again, these are not points you're not coming off of these 2 comments. I think you've done a great job. Just food for thought for somebody who did something that I like as much as I do here. 7.
New spring leaves budding out.
So in this particular image, using the background that's so out of focus keeps attention on your main subject. I think that was a smart choice. I'm going to ask myself lots of questions when I photograph. 1, how many main subjects do we have? I think we have 2 that we can argue. And they're really merging with each other. Not only the vertical part coming off the stem, they kind of, and then you lose the anatomy, the one in the back, but it keeps popping into play behind both the leaves off to the left and the leaves off to the right. Even the center portion. I don't know if that's the same flower or not, probably not. But I just think that the merger is very strong, and changing your angle to kind of give identity to each one of those 2 things would be helpful, or find a different cluster. 6.
Land iguana.
So very crisp, a lot of vibrant color in this, a background that's out of focus. I am going to ask one little nitpick question. When you look at this is really about texture more than anything, this portrait. The textures, in the skin of this iguana is awesome. And then you've got the spines on the top, and the one spine that takes the most identity, the biggest dominant cool looking spine, the tip is touching the edge of the frame. Something I would think about to make sure that I had a little bit more space and then could crop it later. And then when you're cropping it later, stare at it and ask yourself lots of questions. I do think we could improve the processing a little bit in 2 ways. 1, the white scales on the left side, I'd probably tone them down a little bit because they're the brightest part. You're leading my eye away from what's super cool. And the next thing I would do is I'd really want to keep my attention on the iguana's face. That's the whole intent. I would desaturate some of the yellows in the leaves in the background because they do command attention, especially the ones underneath the, the mandible of the iguana. 7.
Morning dew on an orchid.
Beautiful exposure throughout. I think the morning dew is very pleasing if that's what you want to do. I think what's in focus is great. I am going to ask some questions because that's what I do. What's this picture of? You put it in your title, and I think you were totally correct. So is it a morning dew on an orchid with lots of leaves jutting into the frame? Because you have one leaf that's jutting into the middle of the orchid. This is your specimen. You got a black background. You had control of this to some degree. Why couldn't you just, pull that leaf down for the picture? Hold it with one hand, your camera's on a tripod, or if your handheld even, and pull that leaf, that one going through the left side, take that out of there. The other thing is, I understand this is certain anatomy, but does the leaf on the right side, the green leaf, is that really helping? It's jutting into the right side of the orchid. I'm not so sure it helps the composition either. And then the last thing is, you're drawn into red, and red's your color. You have a little hint of it in the leaf on the bottom, which I like, the main one in the bottom of the frame. But then you've got the leaf on the left, which is the same orangey red. Is it competing for the attention where you're drawing my eye to? You draw my eye in your composition. Each petal leads me to the middle. And then I move out of the middle to move to that same color on the left. Something to think about simplifying this. 7.
Orchid splendor.
I think it presents very well. This has got what I was talking about with the background, that you're showing some anatomy. Every part of it seems like it has a purpose. It is definitely not competing, in its focus or in its color or saturation with the main subject. So I think that works very nicely. I like the way you're positioning your flower anatomically. You've got something of interest throughout the frame. I would probably argue that you may be a half a stop a little overexposed, but it's not blown out. I still think you did an excellent job. 7. 8. 9. 7. 8. 9. 8. 9. 8. 8. 9. Am I at the point yet where I have to get someone to start my car for me because I saw The Godfather what happened? Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm working on it.
Science Salon, macro and close-up. Honorable mention. Computer board on fire, Wendy Milligan. Blue Poppy, Charlene Fedowitz. Dahlia Center, Ellen Stein. Land Iguana, Lenny McDonald. Morning Dew on Orchid, Ellen Stein. Equal Merit. Legged Fly, Lenny McDonald. Nazca Booby, Lenny McDonald. Anthurium Elegance, Charlene Fedowitz. Orchid Splendor, Charlene Fedowitz. Okay, now to the opens. Open B. Feast.
I think this is very good thought process, especially in this class. You've gotten in tight. You have a point of interest. It's that eye. You have an accessory piece, which is that part in the middle of the head where the hairs are well, not, they're go, it's going, the fur is going to the right, it's going to the left. And then of course you've got the accessory piece of the fly. I like the way the light moves throughout this also, for the most part. I would ask a question. When you have a focal point, which is going to be the main thing, is going to be the eye. I understand that you try to fit it in equidistant from the left side of the eye to the edge of the frame to the right side of that V in the middle of the head where the fur goes left and right, equidistant on both sides. But I would consider maybe going a little bit wider and getting the eye more toward the junction of the thirds or something like that if possible. I think it might be a little more interest. The other thing is you want to keep my attention at the eye. So you might want to decrease the brightness of the fur, which is not overexposed on the top left part of the frame, just so that the attention stays more on the eye itself. Your scoring is going to be very good for this group, but you're doing such a nice job. I don't want to let you not, take things next step further next time you're in the scenario. 7.
The dock.
So for me, I appreciate that we're taking offset this bar. You got, changing the overall balance. I'm glad you have separation between the undersurface of the horizontal part of the bar and the horizontal part of the edge of the dock on that side. So I think that was a good choice. I kind of wonder how attractive our main subject is, and could we change its angle? Maybe make that bar look a little bit more dominant by getting it even further away from the dock, by getting lower. Its anatomy would stand out a whole lot stronger. I think that would be helpful. The other thing is, this is an image that's begging for more exposure in parts of the frame. Where do I mean that? Well, there's like a pipe or something coming out to the left of the dock on the strut of the dock on the left, and you can barely even make it out. So we're really dark on that side. So I think we can do some shadows and highlights to help overall balance this. But think about what your main focal point is and how you can make it present the best. And for me, I think it's the bar. And, can I make that bar present stronger? 6.
The message.
So I think you've done a great job with your exposure here. I find very intriguing how your model is intrigued with what's going on. I think that elevates your story. I would say you're not clipping, the guy up on the lift, but would I give a little bit more space behind the person so they're just not so close to the frame? Personal choice, something to think about. My suggestion is that I would give a little bit more space there. I think it would be helpful, but it's still a great job. 7. Nine.
Open V. Equal merit. Beast. Leon Labransky. The message. Leon Labransky. I want to know where that is. Open A. Empty lake.
It's funny. Some judges want things so darn tight, and some want them so loose. You're kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place. What this particular judge on that night's going to like, but so what are our focal points and how are they placed in the frame? What's our angle of view? Well, I think the focal points are the tables and the trees for the most part. That's the primaries. And with that being said, I like the way that you're separating the corner, the lower left corner of the table on the left from the vertical trunk of that tree. I think that's very well thought out. You're also separating as well as you can between that and the bench all the way to the left. Your vertical height, the table on the left side, the bench on the right of it, really is not merging with the undersurface of the table. So that vertical height is really done very nicely also. And I'm glad the table on the right, you're not going to make it not merge with that tree trunk right behind it, but you're definitely keeping it into an acceptable range with the one in the middle. Good choice. I think also vertically, not having the middle tree have the horizontal branch not on your horizon line are all good things. They're all positives. In the processing, there's two things I would consider doing. One is I would consider toning down a little bit the exposure on the right bench of the table on the left because it merges with the water behind it and doesn't really separate very well. And the other thing is, the grill barbecue unit is very dark and all its layers are devoid of detail, where you probably had it in color. But if you can kind of control your contrast, because you're heavy in contrast in your processing, and kind of get a little open shadows a little bit there, and I think that would be helpful. But I love your thought process. 7.
Green heron.
Very nice pose. I think you've got pleasing lighting on your heron. You've done a good job with your exposure. I am going to say a couple of things. Not in the scoring. This would look better with fill flash. If you pop flash on this at -1 2/3, just enough to bring the iridescence in those feathers to life and not make it look so flashed. I use a flash extender. You would like it better. Not that you have to flash it, but just something to think about. One of the things that's a challenge is keeping in focus the depth of field, especially since you're shooting down on this bird. But you do have separation between the end of the branch and the bird. But you've got the feet in focus and the bird, top of the bird in focus, and so you were paying attention to your depth of field. So hats off to you. Little nitpicking thing. Left side of the frame. Let's start from the top. Clean all the way down. Midpoint, there's a smudge or something in the water that's presenting as a smudge. Would I clone that out with my spot heel? I would. If you go down to the bottom, that brown, and the dark brown in the corner, looks like it's not quite the continuation of the same log and it's starting to ride up the left side. Would I clone that out? Absolutely. Little nitpicking thing. I'm not taking points off in the A group for that. Don't get nervous. And then just above the eye, the heron, halfway to the top of the frame is another one of those bright little smudges. I kind of probably just, since you're going to have such uniformity everywhere, I would consider that. 7.
Sunset and burn.
Very pleasing light on this. Gorgeous lighting. I like the layering effect as you move through the frame also. I think you've done a very nice job with your exposure. I'm going to say two things. One is not in the scoring, but in the whole bottom half of the frame, which stands out the strongest? I think it's the choice of colors. And with that being said, where you've only got a little bit of the yellows on the left, would it look better if you saw more of what's on the left? You also have the roof slope going that way. So I would consider, unless the frame gets ugly on the left side, I think a little bit more of a square format instead of close to a square format might look a little bit stronger in the presentation. When you look at those little windows in the attic space, the one on the right is touching the right edge. Could you keep a little bit more space so you're not touching that right edge? Something else I would consider. And then the last comment is that's the most vibrant orange roof. 7.
Stop and reflect.
This is why I photograph before I go for dinner and wine, because otherwise things get a little fugazi, as we say, when you come out. Everything's backwards, even the one-way sign's backwards. I think that adds nice to the story being told, right? I do think it's pretty cool. We have almost a sense of reality on the people, except for the fact that the ladies, a little tilting into the guy. And then the distortion as it moves around the edge. I think it has a pretty decent feel to it. 7.
Japanese garden.
So if your intent is to keep my focus on the island and the 3 trees, I think you've done a decent job of it. You've cropped this as a flat panel. And, it's up to you whether you appreciate the flat panel presentation or not. But, I think that's irrelevant in my scoring. What I would say, though, is the time of day. Is the light your friend? We've pretty much got, it may not be quite high noon, but we're still in that contrasty range of lighting scenarios. And although it does make the middle tree stand out nicely against the background, I think it makes the contrast a little too heavy everywhere else. So what do you do? One of the things that I would do is I would say, first of all, if this is not your money shot and you're hanging out here, a little more preferred lighting would be helpful. I think an overcast day would really be your ideal. But that's one thing. And if not, I would go into HDR. This way your brights are not quite as bright, your darks are not quite as dark. And I think it would, because your whole rock wall in the front, I mean, you can't even make out the anatomy, what's going on. It's extremely contrasting. 6.
Looks like a ship.
All right. I like the fact that you found something of interest, and I like, you're presenting to me as such. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. What about the anatomy of the architecture do I find the most pleasing? I mean, there's multiple things. I would say one is definitely the curves from horizontal to vertical. Whether it's the ones on the left side of the frame or the ones on the bottom right side of the frame, I think that's super cool. And I love the separation of the vertical spires at the top of the frame. And then the third thing I like a lot is the reflections in the windows. So with that being said, if they're the really cool things that I like, the right side, would I have a little bit more space because the curl anatomy is kind of getting a little bit clipped, I would consider it. I told you the third thing that I liked the most was the reflections. Do we really have a base to the image? You're just almost there. I think you're probably very close to ground level. So would I show a little bit more of the base? Food for thought. Somebody step on a duck.
No.
Okay. 7. I think a little bit more space would be helpful.
Looking up old New York.
So compositionally, things I like how you broke this up. 1/3 on the left side has got the tighter, diagonal coming into the middle of the frame. You committed more space to the buildings on the right side, which I think are the most interesting. So I'm going to ask myself lots of questions. What are the things besides the building that stand out as focal points? I see 3 for sure. 2 lamps, the flags that are hanging across, and the fire escape on the right. And we're kind of really tight on the fire escape on the right. It's awfully close to the lamp, which is the top of the lamp is very close with the edge of the taller building right at the top of it. And the lamp, the secondary lamp, is mostly obscured by the flags. Could I reposition myself so that, and the flags are clipping the bottom of the frame. So I would consider maybe getting slightly lower, which solve the problem with the flags and give those flags a little bit more of an identity by you either just swinging the camera down or getting a little bit lower. If you don't want to show what's on the bottom, then you just get a little lower, which is what I probably would have done anyway, because then I could separate the secondary lamp from the flags a little bit better. I would probably take a step or 2 to the right because now I would take that lamp, the main lamp post, and not make it almost merging with the vertical part of the tallest building in your middle ground. And I would go a little to the right. I would give a little more space to the fire escape. So I do think you have a very nice image, don't get me wrong, but these are questions that would be going through my mind that I think would be helpful before you got to your final product. 7.
Zen.
Okay. I think it's a pleasing angle of view vertically. I think your background works very well with your base that this vessel is on. I'm going to ask you, what is your focal point? Is it the vessel? Is it the flower? Is it the tree in the background? Because if it's the flower, would it present better if you were a little higher shooting down? If it was the vessel, would it present better if we got some sort of light source, whether it's an HDR image or a reflector or something that would get, because most of the vessel is totally devoid of any detail. I can't even tell where the shadow from it meets the bottom of the vessel. The trees, do they serve strength? Are they strengthening the overall composition? I'm glad they're offset from the flower, but they're adding strength. You go to the top of the tree, that bright white lichen or whatever's on the tree is taking on an identity. Does that help? So these are all questions I would ask myself and find out whatever you feel works best in your hands. 6.
A misty morning.
I think it has a pleasing flow. I think we have interest on both sides. I'm going to ask you a question. What's the most interesting part of this image? Well, you made it a huge leading line, right? It's the brickwork. I think the flowers are a strong second, but your bricks occupy a long part of your frame. They lead you in, they take on a real identity. Could you make them present even stronger? If you got a little bit lower, if you pointed your camera down a little bit, then the bricks in the foreground would be bigger, because right now they're almost the same size as they move through the frame until you really get into the distance. So they would take on a stronger identity and make your foreground just present a little bit better. But I do like the separation between your bushes in your foreground and your trees in your background, and I think you exposed it really well. It's still a great image. 7. 8. This is the intermediate group, correct?
Yes, A.
Let's go with a 9. I'll do the same. 9. 9. 8. 9. 9.
Open A. Honorable mention. Empty Lake, Fernando Gomes. Looks like a ship, Margot Partridge. Equal merit. Green Heron, Wendy Kaplitz. Sunset and Burn, Margot Partridge. Stop and Reflect, Fernando Gomes. Looking Up Old New York, Fernando Gomes. A Misty Morning, Margot Partridge. Okay. Good salon.
So as you see, I don't score to my taste, even though I had things that I would change. the maker did a very good job, and that's all that's important. So
Open salon, reflections.
it's pretty interesting. I like the way it's broken up horizontally, dominant on the left side in width and in pattern, and yet you have very tight little thin dainty patterns in a stronger vertical on the right side. I like the separation between the two main reflections. I think that was a very good choice on how you positioned yourself. And you've kept your whole foreground in focus. 7.
Black swallowtail.
I think your camera angle is great. If you look at the blown out nature of the background on the right, you can see its strength. On the left, it's still blown out and it's okay. But you can just because when we talk about backgrounds, how they can either take on attention or not take on attention, works great. I will say though, I think we can get a little bit more depth of field in regards to, most of the top part of the wings are all out of focus. I would like to see a little bit more depth of field. Watch your yellows. Your yellows are a little blown out in the flowers. So just be careful with that. 7.
Tiptoe through your tulips your own way.
I like what you're doing. And I think you've done it it's very interesting, without a doubt. I keep thinking though that the bright yellows in the clothing are drawing my attention away from the effect that you did, because I think the bleed through on some of the other stuff is really cool, but I just keep looking at how bright those yellows are. I think they're overpowering me a little bit. And between having the oranges in his hair and the oranges in the flowers and the back and the lighting, you've got the outfit that stands out so bright, yet the top of his head doesn't. And now it's kind of the same kind of subdued lighting as the background. I'm focusing mostly on the outfit. I'm gonna go to 6.
Cherry blossoms.
Extremely pleasing composition, beautiful light. I think your background works great. The problem is you've got 4 water droplets on the top of the petal all the way to the left. You should have an odd number. So I'm gonna give you a 5. 7.
They call me the breeze.
I can see why. If I did that, I'd be stuck in that position for at least a month. I'm going to tell you something. You captured a great point in time. I love your angle of view. Vertical height. Perfect. Your main subject is higher than the people in the background. Look under the triangles created in that, well, not triangle, but the spaces created under the arms. You can see the tops of the head of the people, so you don't lose sight of how intent they are and everything. This is a difficult exposure now. You've got these bright white, whatever you call these wooden things or plastic things that he's jumping over, and then you've got a black outfit that is not illuminated very well, and yet you've got enough detail in the folds of the outfit that your exposure is, you put a lot of thought into this. You think you did a great job, very hard capture with all of that. One of the things that struck me right out of the gate, which I find really cool, I love geometry. Look at the scalp color is similar in coloration as the bottom, right? And then you've got these like white streaks, and he's got a really awesome hairstyle, and they kind of play against each other. I think it makes the top and bottom of the frame pattern work excellent too. I think you did an awesome job. My only little nitpicking thing would be perhaps maybe, and no points are coming off for it, toning down the undersurface of his shoe. Looks like we open up the shadows a little bit. I think I know he's running on, I guess, clay, but it would make the shoe stand out a little bit. If it was a little bit darker, better from the clay on the bottom. This is still awesome. 7.
Curvaceous reflections.
Beautiful light. I think we have interesting things going on. I like, I can appreciate what you've done. The separation of the main reflection on the left from the second building in, that's a little bit darker. That separation is pretty cool. I kind of wonder though, we've got this large void on the right side. Perhaps if there was clouds in the sky, would it occupy that space a little bit? Or would I consider zooming in and getting tighter on this image? I think the lower right quadrant is the most interesting part of the image. 7.
Palm fern.
Fern. That's what it said. Beautiful light. The black background makes it stand out great. The diagonal nature is awesome. The patterns that you have are awesome. I love how I'm led through. We've got the 2/3 fanning out on the top left of the central vein, and we've got 1/3 on the bottom right. I think it works perfectly. By darkening your background, I think you've taken it in tight enough that although I'm sure you had something to do with it, you've done a decent enough job from this viewing distance. 7.
Malewood duck.
Great, getting nice and low. The use of the reflection is also very pleasing also. I am going to question a couple of things. How about our background? What do we like about our background? I think the left 40% of the frame, or left 50% of the frame's got a really cool background. The right side, not so much. With that being said, I wouldn't want it to occupy that much of the frame. We've got the male wood duck right in the center of the frame. Could you have moved more to the right and brought into play the interesting part of the background? I would try it if it was an option. I don't know how fast the duck was moving either. I also think we have a color cast in this image. We have a magenta color cast. The coloration of that wood duck is not natural. 7, 6 rather, 6, sorry.
Spring blossom.
Good depth of field on your main subject. I do think that the background needs a little bit more out of focus or a little bit of help. Its anatomy is taking on a little bit of an identity. One of the things I would consider doing if you couldn't get it more out of focus, at the risk of not getting in focus all of your main subject, look at the bottom left corner, that bright area, clone that out. The top right, you have pinks now in the background. Let the only pinks be your buds. The background pink is not important for your image. So I would kind of, do a little work on the background and get some of those brighter circles eliminated. 7.
Determined.
Once again, good angle of view, great point in time. Look at the hand position. I love that there's no merger from the hand, her left hand, which is on the right side of the frame, and her body. The position of the hair is awesome. I think you can tone down a little bit of the brightness and vibrancy in her shirt to maybe show a little detail. It's kind of getting close to being a little bit bald. And I probably do a little shadows and highlights on this. The same thing with the shorts. Could you get a little bit of a wrinkle just to add a little bit of anatomy to them? I don't need to see much, but like especially along the edge, the outside edge of the hip, bringing in a little bit, I think would be helpful. 7.
Skyline.
You know, your angle of view is really cool. I'm going to ask, what's the coolest part of this? I love the diagonal nature of the main building coming in high right, low left. I like the building on the left, the spacing on the left, and I love the tower in the background, how it stands out. You know, they're all architecturally kind of similar shapes, but a little bit different in texture and, of course, in overall anatomy. So I think that subtle difference plays very nicely between the three. And then in the top right corner, we've got a building that's sideways. Is it really helping? It's something totally different at an edge. Is it adding strength? Even the turquoise windows at the right, you know, do they help or not help? I kind of think if you crop this into a square format and got a little bit tighter, eliminating some of that sky, your composition would flow a lot better. 7.
Monarch on a flower.
I think for the most part, things working very nicely in this image. There are a couple of things that I want to ask, you know, one is we're blown out in our flowers. Our oranges right in the center of the frame and our yellows, the flowers are blown out, and probably because of saturation. So I would desaturate them a little bit. Don't let them overpower your butterfly either. I'm going to ask 2 other questions. The dead bud and the leaf on the bottom center of the frame, do they help your composition? Or would I remove them? Obviously, you can't remove them because the butterfly would split if you got close. But in post-processing, that's such an easy remove with the remove tool. You go right over it, and in 15 seconds, it's gone. The next thing is in your background. Look at the yellow flower all the way to the left. Now follow the background to the left. There's a straight line. Something a little fugazi's going on over there too. So, you know, I kind of wonder how you've got these gentle patterns everywhere and then the straight line over there. So be a little careful with what's going on. 6.
Generation Next, Mother and Juvenile.
Okay. I think it tells a nice story. Couple questions. The overall balance of the image, top to bottom, the top part, left, right is great. On the bottom, the choice of clipping the bottom of the perch that the one eagle, the juvenile, is on, would I show an extra 6 inches on the bottom just to have that perch not kind of almost be lost at the bottom of the frame? That's one thing I would ask. The next thing, and the thing that I struggle the most with this image, because I do like your overall composition, I make that comment, but look at the processing. It is really, really strongly overdone. Our colors are not right. The amount of contrast and sharpening is really heavy-handed, and it's making it look really, really too much, I think. So I'd love to see you reprocess this. 6.
Strolling along the branch.
All right, great angle of view. I think you've depressed the shutter at a very pleasing point in time. I do want to give you a little bit of, listen, you did a great job. I like your image. Don't get nervous. I do think you can make it pop a little bit more. And the way I would do it is in levels. If you're using Photoshop, open a levels window. And when you get the little window, you're going to see a histogram. And underneath the histogram, I know I've been through this in the past, but I want to do it again. You're going to see 3 triangles. One on the left, that's a black triangle. That's your black point. The one in the middle is gray. That's going to be for contrast. And the one on the right is white. That's going to be your white point. Now, white point and black point does not necessarily mean color white or color black. It's what's brightest in the frame, what's darkest in the frame. And what you want to do is if you're using a Mac, you're going to hit the Option key and hold it. Don't release it. If you're using a PC, you're going to depress the Alt key and don't release it. Hold it. And then with your mouse, you're going to click under the little white triangle. And your screen of the image itself is going to go black. And then you're going to move that white triangle from right to left. And then the brightest thing in the frame will be the first thing that's going to start showing you some little spots lighting up on the frame. It's probably going to be the white and the feathers around the head behind the eye. And you're going to release there so that they're not lighting up. And your image is going to be brighter and it's going to have pop. Because you do have good contrast, you do have a good black point, but you can make this pop a little more by making that brighter. If you're not sure how to do it, feel free to give me a call during the day, and I can talk you through it on your computer. 7. There we go on time. Okay. 9. 7. 9. 9. 8. 9. 8. 8. 8. 9. Oh, we're on the last group anyway.
Yes. Open Salon, honorable mention. Curvaceous Reflections, Lenny McDonald. Spring Blossom, Charlene Federitz. Determined, Al Brown. Skyline, Lenny McDonald. Equal Merit. Reflections, Lenny McDonald. Cherry Blossom, Charlene Federitz. They Call Me the Breeze, Al Brown. Palm Fern, Ellen Stein. Strolling Along the Branch, Charlene Federitz. And that concludes our night.
Well, you know, her name, she would be Stern if I was 9:30. But 9 o'clock, everything's good. All right, who's yelling at me?
Does anybody online have any questions?
None, thank you. None, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Before everybody gets, you gotta mute.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Before everybody gets off, Fern, oh no, Alan Gerber sent us a chat in the chat that Macy's Flower Show begins this Thursday and runs to May 10th. In New York at Herald Square. And if anybody is interested in going in and you can do some macro shooting there. I've never been to this one, so I have no idea what you're going to find. But I've heard it's a good show. Anybody have any questions here in Cranford? No. Okay, I'll say good night to everybody online and start thinking about what item, if you're going to come and shoot next week, that you're going to bring with you. Thank you.
After this year so far.